Namaskar, I am Pankaj Saran. I am delighted to be your host to take you around the major developments that are affecting all of us in the world. It is a complex world that we live in, and we have to be able to understand what is going on and what impacts India and what impacts global peace, stability, and security. So today I am joined by three senior journalists who are going to ask me questions about the latest developments that have happened in our part of the world relating to China and Taiwan. And I'm happy to take their questions so that we can understand what has happened, why it has happened, and what are the implications for India and for the entire region. So here we go, and I would now ask all the journalists to shoot the questions to me, and I'll be happy to reply to all of them as well as I can. And I hope that in this process, you also join me in this journey to understand the world as we see it. So thank you, and let's start without any further ado.
So I would start with asking you. How do you see the situation which is building up in the wake of China's biggest ever military drills in the Taiwan Strait?
Yes, this is something which has caught the attention of the whole world. I would say that there are two or three aspects to the build-up. One is, of course, the military aspects. The second is the political and the signaling aspects. And the third is what it means for the future of the region. So if I take the first aspect first, which is the military aspects, it is now believed and understood that these were the largest ever military exercises conducted by China along in the Taiwan Straits. By the largest, what do we mean? We mean that the Chinese armed forces, after the visit of the US Speaker Nancy Pelosi on the 2nd of August, they decided to conduct live fire exercises. And these exercises involved the Navy, they involved the rocket forces, and they involved the Chinese Air Force. And the Chinese military, interestingly, did not conduct these exercises surreptitiously. They announced the fact that they were having these exercises. They publicized these exercises, and they identified 6 zones around Taiwan, virtually encircling Taiwan. And the point they wanted to make was that Taiwan is so important for China in terms of its sovereignty and integrity that China will do whatever is required to ensure that the principle they hold, which is that Taiwan is a part of China, is upheld. So that was the military aspect. And the response to it from the Taiwanese side was that they also started doing live fire military exercises. But the sheer scale and the volume of the Chinese military exercises was staggering. And that has caught the attention not just of the entire world, but even of the major power, that is the United States. The second aspect, I think, of the exercises was the political or the signaling aspect. It is interesting that contrary to what the Chinese were saying prior to the visit of the US Speaker, that they will disrupt her flight, they will escort her plane, they may even shoot down the plane, they chose not to do anything during the visit. But the moment she left, they began these exercises, number one. And number two, they openly publicized the fact that they were doing it. So they wanted the world to know that this is what they were doing. And the message was to the people of Taiwan, to the government of Taiwan, and to the United States that we will do whatever is necessary and no one can stop us. And the third message was to tell the Taiwanese that if you are going down the path of a military confrontation, then you have no hope of victory. That means we will achieve reunification with the Taiwan island by force if necessary. Otherwise, we will do it peacefully. But if you are not willing to do it peacefully, we will do it by force. So the third message, I think, which comes across from these exercises and the military drills is to the neighbors of Taiwan, to the countries in the region from South ASEAN countries, Japan, Korea, Australia. They are all watching what is going on, and they are watching the humongous scale of the Chinese military might at work. And what we have to ask ourselves is that today this is a response to a visit of a US speaker. Within a few days, the United States sent another congressional delegation to Taiwan. And it is quite possible to conceive of a situation where the Americans could decide at some later date to have yet another visit by a speaker or a senior official. So, in other words, the future precedent-setting quality of this particular exercise is extremely important. And just to also clearly understand what the Chinese did, that between the Chinese mainland and the Taiwan as an island, the borders are notionally divided along the median line. And typically the Chinese have not crossed the median line. It's like an informal border. But this time, the Chinese crossed the median line. And the 6 zones that they identified, some of them were so close to Taipei, the capital, that it was quite unsettling. So I think this is basically the sum and substance of the exercises.
Right.
Ambassador, how can, as you rightly said, Taiwan is a very small island compared to the mainland China, though it's a technological, kind of giant in its own way. But how can it withstand so much pressure from China? Is it only banking on foreign powers to support it, or it really has some military might to? Can it counter China in any way?
Very good. You see, what Taiwan has in its favor, firstly, of course, the population is 23 million. That's the population of Delhi. And that's the population of the entire island. And you are pitted against a country with a population of 1.4 billion people. So there is huge asymmetry. There is asymmetry of military might. There is no comparison. I mean, the Chinese military might today is equal to or almost equal to that of the United States. But what they have in their favor is a deep sense of history. Because before the declaration of the People's Republic of China, the Kuomintang or the KMT or the nationalist forces had fled to Taiwan. And till 1979, the United States actually had diplomatic relations with the Republic of China. And they recognized only the Republic of China as the sole representative of the Chinese people. And the capital of the Republic of China was Taiwan, was Taipei. So if you ask what drives these 23 million people, it is this sense of history that historically they were actually the true and the original representatives of the entire Chinese people. And the fact that they have now been banished to an island and the communists have taken over the entire mainland is something that is very much alive in their mind. So that's the first part, which actually compensates for the asymmetry of military might. When it comes to the economy and technology, Taiwan is the engine of global technological growth. It accounts for almost 50% of the semiconductor and chips manufacturing capability in the world. Its per capita income is 3 times that of the People's Republic of China. It's very proud of its democratic traditions. In fact, in 2016, this current government in Taiwan took over, and even today, the Chinese refer to this government as separatists and secessionists. So they have that sense of righteousness about what they're doing. And lastly, which you have correctly pointed out, what gives them strength is the support of the United States to the Taiwanese people. Over time, successive US presidents have approved billions and billions of dollars of weapons transfers to Taiwan. In fact, I was looking at some of the figures. I think over a period of the last couple of decades, you would have had transfers worth more than $20 billion by the United States to Taiwan for what they call self-defense purposes of Taiwan. Some kinds of weaponry has not been given, such as, say, fighter aircraft like the F-16s, but they have been given many other kinds of weaponry to combat. But in a conflict, it is absolutely clear that Taiwan will not be able to sustain a military conflict with China. But the political support from the United States and the West and the military support is also adding to the courage which the Taiwanese people feel in dealing with China.
Ambassador Saran, you've briefly touched upon this issue of the extent of which United States can go. But in your assessment, to what extent will the United States go to put its weight behind Taiwan? Because you may have seen Kurt Campbell, the President Biden's advisor, who said that despite tensions, US forces will continue to fly, sail and operate where international law allows, consistent with our long-standing commitment to freedom of navigation. So how do you look at this scenario playing out?
Yeah. You know, the relationship between the United States and Taiwan is a very interesting relationship. And a lot of it has to do with internal American politics. I mean, if you look at the behavior of the Democrats and the Republicans, over a period of time, they have pursued different kinds of policies. And it's been very personal to the president in terms of what kind of policies they have pursued. Mostly, if you look at, say, the legal position, even as recently as a few days ago, when the United States issued its statement from the State Department, they have once again reiterated that they believe in the One China policy. They also said they do not believe in Taiwanese independence. And they also said there should be no unilateral change in the status quo. So all these statements are there. The US relationship with Taiwan is actually governed by the United States-Taiwan Relations Act. And that act provides the framework under which the Americans deal with Taiwan, which is treating Taiwan just short of statehood. That means they do not regard it as an independent country, but short of that. I mean, for example, a sovereign country has certain attributes of statehood. It has complete sovereignty, it has defined borders, it has its own constitution, etc., etc. So even in terms of the diplomatic relations between the United States and Taiwan, they do not have full-fledged diplomatic ties. These ties were actually broken in 1979 by President Jimmy Carter. And in 1979, the United States opened its diplomatic relations with Beijing, with the People's Republic of China. So therefore, today, for example, the two countries do not have embassies in each other's capitals. The Americans have something which they call the American Institute of Taiwan.
I see.
In Taipei. And the Taiwanese have the Taiwan Economic and Cultural Representative Office, TECRO, in Washington. In fact, that's the same name of the Taiwanese office in New Delhi. So these are not full-fledged embassies, they're short of embassies, but in the case of the Americans, for example, the AIT is headed by a former diplomat, an American diplomat, James Moriarty, who is well known to us because he's served many years in Bangladesh and Nepal, etc. So it's the word which the Americans use to describe their relationship with Taiwan is strategic ambiguity. And this is deliberately used, and within this framework, they pursue their policies towards China.
Ambassador Saran, do you think that the combined strength of US and India will make China hold its horses for long? How do you see the situation playing out?
You know, I think we should keep India out of this because this is a kind of relationship and a dynamic that is being played between the United States and China. And the stakes are so high that I do not believe that India can play any significant role in this situation. As I mentioned earlier, I told you about what the Americans have perceived to be the framework of their relationship with Taiwan and with China. On the other hand, if you look at what the Chinese say, the Chinese have said, they have issued, by the way, the third white paper on Taiwan, which has just come out a few days ago. And it's a long document, but the primary message of that document is reunification of the mainland in the new era. And the new era, in their understanding, is the presidentship of President Xi Jinping. So they have said that by 2049, we will reunify the island or Taiwan with the mainland. We would like to do it peacefully, but if it is not possible peacefully, we will do it forcefully or militarily. So in this kind of a situation, which you have a kind of a face-off between the Americans and the Chinese, the question of where India fits in, I think is best left on the table, because there is no ready answer or recipe or prescription for what India should be doing in this situation. If a lot of the Chinese behavior towards Taiwan on the question of reunification is also going to depend on American behavior. And there will be a situation where both Washington and Beijing will be judging each other and trying to second guess each other's moves, and to also see which way the people of Taiwan swing. So, for example, in recent opinion polls in Taiwan, a majority of the people, when asked, see themselves first as Taiwanese and secondly as Chinese. And a lot of them are in favor of maintaining the status quo, if not becoming independent. The proportion of the Taiwanese who want to rejoin China is low. So a lot of this is going to also depend upon the views of the Taiwanese people. Right. But if the Chinese see that the mood is turning against China, say over a period of years, it is possible they may be tempted to take some preemptive action, which could be military also. From the United States point of view, we should also keep in mind that while we see all this on at the surface and in the media, the fact of the matter is that both the presidents, President Biden and President Xi Jinping, they actually had a long telephone video meeting a few weeks before Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit. And they discussed Taiwan, and they discussed the visit of the US Speaker. So we must understand that superpowers such as the United States and an aspirant superpower like China have the capability to handle and discuss and manage the most difficult and contentious issues. And this has to be done, as in the past, at the level of the presidents, because it is so sensitive.
Right.
Ambassador Saran, may I take you to another question now? I mean, we have been hearing, at least reading, that, the Han people of China, who are the main people, they have this notion about themselves that they're born to rule the world. And China seems to be moving in that direction. Here and there, they show their presence. Very interestingly, through economic means, they come there, through development. So in the context of this, the current situation with Taiwan, the conflict with Taiwan, can we go beyond that and see what are the Chinese expansion plans in the world, and how they are trying to grow their influence beyond Taipei?
Yeah. So, if you look at the history of China and you look at the history of their presidents, starting from Chairman Mao Zedong, then you had Deng Xiaoping, then you had Jiang Zemin, then you had Hu Jintao, and now you are in the era of President Xi Jinping, which is the era of rejuvenation. And each of them have been there for years and years, and each of them has left a stamp, his personal stamp, on the Communist Party of China and on the people of China. And there were different historical stages China went through, either of the Cultural Revolution, which had its very, very serious adverse impacts on the people. But then you also had periods where they were consolidating their economic base and their economic prosperity, and they were not so expansionist. Since the ascent of President Xi Jinping in 2013, so next year will be 10 years, in the last 9 years, we have seen a much more assertive China. And I think one of the most important policy announcements made, which seems to have now become the foundation of Chinese global presence, is the Belt and Road Initiative, which he announced in 2013. And that was a plan which was meant to externalize China's domestic economic power across Africa, across Asia, and in fact, even in Europe. So that plan was a very elaborate plan to put Chinese presence, and it still remains a dual purpose plan. So part of it is economic, as you said, development, social development, big projects in Africa. But another reality of it is the military purposes. So you have had, for example, just to name a few, it's in the news today, the Chinese naval base in Djibouti. The Chinese presence or ostensible presence, or let us say the prospective presence, or even other kinds of not so well-known presence in Gwadar port in Pakistan, and of course in Hambantota in Sri Lanka, and in a port called Chakfu in Myanmar. So what you see is, apart from the economic and social and developmental linkages, you have this reality too. And as you correctly said, China regards itself as the Middle Kingdom. They see the world in a hierarchical terms, that I am the center of the universe and everyone is inferior to me. And so when President Xi Jinping talks about rejuvenation, about the Chinese century, etc., he actually believes that China's time has come. There is no need today to bide your time and hide your light. That phase is over. Today, China has arrived. So, in terms of, say, its military might, in terms of the strength of its navy, in terms of its technological capabilities, it is moving very, very fast. So, I think we are in for an era of very rapid and significant Chinese expansionism. And we have seen it in 2020. We can discuss that. But it is true that this is happening across the landmass of the world, across the maritime domain. In every single sphere, we are actually witnessing this process.
Ambassador Saran, Taipei called these drills a rehearsal for invasion. The drills, the largest ever drills by Beijing. In the event of China invading Taiwan, which is it's hell-bent on doing, as you also said, what are the strategic implications for India?
Well, I think it's going to be, so we can break it down, in terms of the economic impact, the security impact, and the political impact. So if I take the economic impact first, if this were to happen, and we can discuss the possibility of this happening. Let's just keep that aside for the moment. Let us assume that there is such a scenario, and I'll come back to whether it is plausible or not. But if there is such an event and such a development, then if you look at the economic impact, it will be highly destabilizing for India, because today, although our trade with Taiwan is not as much as it is with China, but Taiwan is very much part of the global supply chain. And since today we are in a technology world, the supply of chips and semiconductors is critical to the growth of our economy. So the economic impact will be very serious, because there will be huge supply disruptions. And since a development like this will not be limited only to China and Taiwan, but could involve third powers, we might have a very serious situation very close to us. So the economic impact will be quite adverse. Second is, when we look at the security impact, I think what will happen is that you will find much more militarization. There will be, and war is always something which leads to a lot of destruction. If there is a clear-cut victor, then it can lead to revenge, it can lead to acute instability. It will obviously impact the neighbors first and foremost, which is the Southeast Asian countries, but it will impact us also. You could have a situation where the Chinese armed forces, if they are going to be focused on Taiwan, we will have to study what will be the impact on their strategy vis-a-vis India on the Tibetan plateau, along the line of actual control in the Western Theatre Command, and how Chinese armed forces will redeploy, relocate, or re-strategize when it comes to their borders with India. And a lot of it will depend upon how the invasion goes with Taiwan. So that is something which will have a direct impact, Chinese behavior on the line of actual control, in terms of its deployment, in terms of its capabilities, and in terms of the amount of money that they put into that area. And the third, I think, is the political impact. The world will change.
Right.
And the aftershocks of this will be felt. If today the Ukrainian development has polarized the world, if this were to happen, it will increase the polarization even more. And you could have a very serious situation on your hand where you have America and its allies and Russia and China on the other side. And unfortunately, there would not be much that we would be able to do, because then this would be a conflict among the major powers of the world. And so all in all, I would say it would be something which would not be in our interest, because today, if China has a flight path for its economy and its nation development till 2049, don't forget, we also have our Amrit Kal period from 75 to 100, that we have some aspirations for our economy and our country till 2047. And in this next 25 years, the primary objective and task of the Indian state is the national development, growth and prosperity of the people of India. And we are already 1.3 billion people. It's a matter of time before we become the largest country in the world. So all this is not going to be helpful for this cause. Now, just to finish on the last point about the plausibility of an invasion, frankly, this is on paper. The white paper which has been issued presents the full Chinese thinking. But whether an invasion is likely or not is a different question. And in my own personal view, I do not believe that such an event is likely in the near future, unless and until someone makes a very reckless move. But short of that, I do not believe that such an extreme step will be taken.
Ambassador Saran, recently the arrival of a so-called maritime research vessel of Chinese origin in Sri Lanka has caused concern to us. How do you see this event?
Well, it is serious because Chinese research vessels have been sailing into the Indian Ocean, and particularly those parts of the Indian Ocean which are close to the Indian mainland for the last few years. And this is a new strategy being pursued by the Chinese Navy, where they use these militia or these proxy naval vessels to come to areas that are of direct concern to us. So rather than having naval vessels, they are now also deploying these so-called civilian research vessels, but which have technologies which are used for intelligence gathering and for monitoring and also for sabotage. So this vessel, which has just come to Sri Lanka, is among the most advanced vessels. And it is a matter of concern for us because it has capabilities which have a direct impact on our own military and space-based assets. And the intentions or the capabilities by themselves are detrimental to our national security. So we have to now be prepared to deal with such vessels coming in. And it is also possible that such visits will continue to take place, and perhaps we may find more such vessels or activity. The Chinese commercial traffic through the Indian Ocean is there. I mean, 80% of the global trade, maritime trade, goes through the Indian Ocean. The Chinese are totally dependent on the sea lanes of communication that pass through the Indian Ocean, because that is where their oil imports go through the Straits of Malacca, and that's also the route they take for their own exports to the Middle East and to Europe, etc. So for them, this is a critical path for their maritime trade. But we have to be careful to see that while commercial activity is unexceptionable and it is something which is legitimate, when it comes to military activity or dual purpose activity, such as, say, the Hambantota port, which has been leased to the Chinese for 99 years and today is being used to host such kinds of vessels, is not something that we can ignore. And it is important for India to both make its views known as well as to take relevant countermeasures, which I believe the Indian Armed Forces and the relevant agencies are in the process of doing.
Ambassador, we have kind of relation with both China and Taiwan. Whatever kind of relationship we can have with Taiwan, we have some sense of that. And we are doing business with both. With China, we have excellent business. We want to grow it despite having, what happened in Ladakh. So in that situation, in case this conflict, it rises, it increases, its intensity goes up, and India will have to do again a balancing act. How difficult it's going to be for India to do a balancing act between China and Taiwan, or India will be sucked into this conflict. What is your opinion on that?
No, I think we have done a lot of this balancing over the last 2-3 decades.
So far, yes.
Between China and Taiwan. Our policy towards China and our policy towards Taiwan are well established and they are well known. In the last few years, our economic and technology trade with Taiwan has grown, and our people-to-people exchanges with Taiwan have grown. And we have told the Chinese that because of the national needs of the Indian economy, we will continue to do business with Taiwan and with Taiwanese companies. And there are actually Taiwanese investments in India, and the government of India and the private sector in India are extremely keen to further enhance and attract Taiwanese investments into India. I see that only growing in the future, regardless of the political relationship and the political aspects. So that is going to happen. There is huge interest in India, and there is huge interest among Taiwanese companies to further increase this relationship, and also to source and to relocate some of the companies in India, because you cannot, and no country in the world, not even China, can ignore a growing market like India. Right. No one can ignore it. Right. Insofar as the political aspects are concerned, a lot of it is also going to depend on how the overall relationship between India and China moves, and the attitude China shows to resolving differences with India and to addressing India's concerns. But we cannot have a situation where China thinks it has a free pass vis-a-vis its relationship, say, with Pakistan, where it is almost treating Pakistan like a proxy state and stationing its military resources in Pakistan. So we cannot have a situation, for example, where China does not respect the line of actual control, or it does not respect the agreements on peace and tranquility along the border, or it continues to mobilize hundreds and thousands of soldiers and aircraft and radars and artillery along the line of actual control to coerce India or to put pressure on India. So our relationship with China is going to depend on whether China, not in words, but in deed, they respect India's growth, respect India's sovereignty, and respects India's concerns. That will determine how our relationship with China moves.
Ambassador Saran, what is your reading of China-Pakistan ties? I mean, you just touched upon it briefly, but if you could give us an overview.
I think it is now quite clear, and we should have no illusions about the fact that the China-Pakistan relationship is anchored in the military and intelligence fields, because the economic relationship is non-existent. There is nothing which Pakistan can provide to China in terms of exports. And nor is Pakistan a large enough economy for China to export to. So the economic and trade base of the relationship is practically non-existent. What is critical for China is Pakistan's geographical location, because it provides China with access to the Indian Ocean through Gwadar and the so-called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which in my opinion, there is nothing economic about this corridor. It has got only military applications. So the China-Pakistan relationship is something we have to consider seriously. As I mentioned to you, it transcends traditional military ties. It includes nuclear military cooperation, and it also includes intelligence cooperation. So we have to be extremely watchful, and we have to incorporate that whenever we shape our own strategic environment, and we sit down and prepare for the kind of threats that India faces. And we have to treat this as a given and as something which is only going to grow in the future. Although I must also say that there is growing frustration in China about Pakistan's economic and political failure, because at every moment and every juncture, China has had to bail out Pakistan. But the reality is that despite sinking in billions and billions of dollars into the Pakistan economy, today the Pakistan economy is on the verge of bankruptcy. So the Chinese example of cooperation with Pakistan is a very bad example for the rest of the world. So thank you very much, viewers. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. I think the questions were very perceptive and very topical, and we hope to continue this dialogue. And please let us know your feedback and your comments, and hopefully we should be back again very soon to pick up yet another topical subject of interest, and we would be delighted to share our perspectives with you. And stay tuned, and thank you so much.